Okay, good evening, everybody. We've just gone live on YouTube channel, so good evening. Warm welcome to this evening's Rushcliffe Borough Council Growth and Development Scrutiny Group meeting. I'd just like to remind everybody that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel, and in addition, other people may film, record, post on social media or blog from the meeting, and the use of any such images or sound recordings is not under our control, the Council's control. And I'll remind councillors to please then switch your microphones on when you wish to, when you're speaking, and please switch them off again when you finish so that others can get on the microphones. Thank you. We have a number of officers presenting reports and some external and some other speakers this evening. So this evening we have just welcome Leanne Ashmore, Director of for Development and Economic Growth for Rushcliffe, and Ben Ryder, Economic Growth and Corporate Project Officer, who will be presenting the report. And then we also have as guests Councillor Neil Clark, Leader of the Council and Cabinet Member and Portfolio Holder for Strategic and Borough-wide Leadership. And then Councillor Upton, who's the Cabinet Member and Portfolio Holder for Planning and Housing, whose portfolio tonight's subject area falls within. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming along this evening. Sorry. Yes, sorry. Also, Helen Knott, Head of Planning for Rushcliffe. My apologies, Helen. You're on the on my agenda here. Sorry, at the moment. Thank you for coming as well. I'd now like to move to the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Della, and there is no substitutes. And we have apologies from Councillor Walker, and we have Councillor Edivine to substitute this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for stepping in, Councillor Edivine. Any declarations of interest from anybody? No, thank you very much, in which case we'll move to the next item, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 29th of January 2025. I hope that everybody in attendance has had the opportunity of reading through those. There is just, I know there has been an update since that on banking in Rushcliffe, which was one of the additional items that we asked for as a committee. I haven't personally had time to look through that in any detail yet, but just thank the officers for providing that to us, and I'm sure when the item comes back for scrutiny later on, we'll be able to give that some more thought and questions in due time. Leslie, was there something you wanted to raise on that particular subject before we ask for any other items on those minutes?
Yes, thank you. And thanks to Catherine for sending this round. It's quite worrying, the lack of banking opportunities for people in our borough. It's really useful to have this list of access to cash. And one question I had was, are we aware, Catherine would probably be able to answer this if she was here, are we aware of ATMs in other areas, in some of the smaller but still reasonably sizable villages? I can think of places like Sutton Bonington. Is there an ATM in there, for example, that doesn't come in this list? And it may be something that we could look into. And also on the back, she's put a nice map of where there's post offices and cash access. So my question is this all of the cash access? Because there's huge swathes of the borough here with nothing in it, which affects elderly people and people without public transport probably to a higher degree than most people. And also there's a list of banks here. My question was going to be, it says High Street Bank, and there's a key at West Bridgeford, and I'm wondering if they are the banks that are served by the mobile banking at West Bridgeford Library, if they actually cover multiple of banks rather than just an individual one.
Just from a bit of personal knowledge, I think they are actually all branches and banks that are covered in West Bridgeford. So I know there are branches of the Nottingham and Santander and NatWest. Lloyds and Halifax in there. So.
At our last meeting, they just announced the closure of NatWest, I think it was, in West Bridgeford, was it? Yeah.
Could have just asked that, that Catherine's not here to answer those questions at the moment, so it might be best if we put those on an email to Catherine, and hopefully she can bring those answers back to the next meeting we have, which is probably so that we get that actually minuted properly for the next time.
And just to answer some of your questions, for that initial document, we focused on the main 7 retail areas, and any obviously further research will be done into the smaller areas as well for any ATM and cash access.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any other issues with the minutes? Sorry, Councillor Clark, you want
Well, sorry, just a bit of a poetic license, Chairman. I'm double booked. I've got another event to go to, so I'm hoping if I can get away sort of as soon after 8 o'clock as I can, that will be helpful. Just very quickly to note, without entering into the discussion, but I have also engaged already with the LGA on banking and already in exchange with them regarding that issue.
Thank you very much. I was about to notify people that you had to leave shortly after 8, but thank you. Just in terms of the minutes from the last meeting, did anyone else have any corrections, any issues with the minutes from that meeting? No, in which case I will mark them as an accurate record. Thank you very much, which brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is number 4, the management of open spaces on new developments, where the officers Leanne and Ben are going to give us a presentation, and I'll then open it up for questioning, including Councillor Clark and Councillor Upton, who have had some dealings regarding this. So thank you very much. Mr. Ryder, over to you. And
thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'll commence with this presentation. I'm keeping it relatively short because you've had a comprehensive report to read tonight. So I'm just going to run through quickly the purpose of the scrutiny meeting this evening and actions that have been carried out since the last meeting. So at the last scrutiny meeting, we presented an action plan. So today I'm going to just give you a quick update on some of those actions that we've carried out in the last 12 to 18 months. There was a cabinet decision in May 2024 where it was reaffirmed that the council will not be adopting open spaces. It supported the good practice guide, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. It supported the work of this scrutiny group, and it supported continuing to lobby government. Action plan update. So that's in your pack, Appendix A. A table of actions that we committed to deliver on. The first one is the supplementary planning document, and Helen is just going to talk to that in a minute. The development of a good practice guide. So you've got a copy of that again in your report. And this is outlining the council's expectations of service on behalf of our residents that are delivered by management companies. The next action was management companies being invited to our community development boards. So the new version of our growth boards. This has happened where it's appropriate to do so. So Fareham and Newton, we've got management companies attending those meetings. The council to act as convener between stakeholders where there are significant disputes. So this was an if and when sort of action, so that we could be called upon as needed. So we haven't yet been called upon to act in that regard. The next one is liaising with other agencies regarding their role in management of open spaces. So particularly this was around the Flood and Water Management Act in 2010, whereby the lead local flood authority would take more of a mandatory role in the design, signing off of SUDs and maintenance of them going forward. So even though that's a 2010 act, that's still not yet been implemented. So that's that has not yet happened. And the final one there is lobbying government, and 3 letters have been sent to government by the leader, Councillor Clark, so far, so which we've had 2 replies so far. The 3rd letter was sent out probably week ago, 2 weeks ago, I think. So we're just waiting for a reply on that one. And this is all regarding putting some legislation in place. It builds on the CMA findings that it's an unregulated sector, and we're lobbying to say that needs to change. So just over to Helen to cover this slide. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, we're currently working on a supplementary planning document for developer contributions, and that's being drafted by the team at the moment. So, within that, there is going to be a section on management of open spaces, and that will cover the requirement for landscaping schemes and management plans. So, that is something that we do at the moment and will continue to do. So, developers will submit plans with a landscaping scheme, and there will be a management plan in terms of maintenance of those planting schemes. So, for example, if a tree dies, there will be a replacement tree put in place. So that's what that refers to. There'll also be a requirement of a commuted sum if the town or parish council wishes to adopt and maintain the open space through the transfer of land. So there'll be an element of that in the SPD. And then also we are looking to reference the good practice guide, which is discussed in the report, and Leanne will pick up in a minute. So there'll be a reference to it and an expectation that from the council that developers will use this document. But it will not be mandatory. It's a document that we will encourage strongly to use. And the draft SPD is going to be considered by the LDF group in April. So that will go through the due process. Thank you.
So just moving on to the good practice guide. We've spent a good while putting this together. We recognise that it is a good practice guide and not, as Helen said, a mandatory document. We have cross-referenced the guide with the New Homes Quality Code to align it with that. We're conscious of the limitation of the authority that the council has got in this space with management companies, but recognise that we could do something. And this is our could do something to hold developers and management companies to higher standards, and to, as part of that, we've had conversations with management companies and developers in creating that guide. And Councillor Clark chaired a roundtable meeting in July last year, and at that meeting he brought together cross-party councillors, developers, management companies, and residents. And the overwhelming agreement from all of those parties was that it should be regulated. There should be some more rules in place. And the management companies and the developers were also saying that. So there was no one around that table that thought that there shouldn't be some form of regulation in place, which was heartening to hear. And as part of the preparation of the Good Practice Guide, it has been circulated to that group of people that attended the roundtable meeting for their comments, and those, where possible, have been incorporated in the document. So everybody's had a chance to feed into that document to make sure it's as good as it can be. So there are 4 themes of the Good Practice Guide, and these are around service, in terms of the quality of service that's delivered, fairness, transparency and community. And at the heart of everything, all those themes, is about making sure that residents have their eyes open to these arrangements that are in place, that they're not buying a property without realising what they're signing up to, and that once they are in a property, they know what to expect from their service charge. They expect a standard of quality in the maintenance, and that fees should be transparent. There shouldn't be spurious fees, as we've heard at some estates. So the next couple of slides just sort of show what you've got in your pack. So I'm not going to go through these, but it was really just to remind you of some of the things that are included in that Good Practice Guide. And I will repeat, because I think it is quite important, that management companies have seen this and developers have seen this. And even though we feel as though this is holding them to account in a way that residents are asking us to, the management companies and developers have agreed, not that required their agreement, but have agreed that they're comfortable with the things that are in this document and they could sign up to it. Because ultimately we want a document that developers and management companies sign up to, and then we can point to it to hold them to account. So I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to go into any particular detail in that, so that can come through questions to me in a minute after the presentation. Yeah, so next steps for us are questions and comments from yourselves. Continue to invite management companies to community development boards as and when they come along. So Bingham, they've not yet identified their management company, but when they do, we'll bring them into the fold. Embed the good practice guide, and that will be liaising with developers, management companies, putting it on our website and making sure that it's embedded in the SPD, and continue to lobby government. So, as I said, it's short presentation. So I'm happy to take questions either now or.
Should we ask Councillor Clark just to provide your views, having chaired that meeting with developers and residents, for your observations on this and views as to where you think this is likely to go and how long it's likely to take?
Oh, that last question.
Keep you on your toes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your invitation to this scrutiny group and this issue. I know it's been discussed a number of times previously, but it is important to the residents and all prospective buyers, as well as current householders as well. In terms of the round table, then yes, I think that was very constructive, and the management companies certainly gave the impression that they were prepared to cooperate and to assist in our endeavours, and I still believe that that is the case. I mean, I was on the council when this issue first came up, probably, I don't know, 15 or more years ago. I can't even remember exactly when it was. I've actually been working on this in terms of lobbying government for well over a year. First writing to Michael Gove when he was Secretary of State. Then there was I had a response that I'd have something resolved within 90 days, but a little matter of a general election popped up, which changed things a little bit, and consequently wrote to Angela Rayner to revitalise the debate again, and received a response from Baroness Sharon Taylor, who I know very well, because wearing another hat, when I was chairman of District Council's network for 6 years, she was my vice chairman. So we've had a lot of working together, and so I know her well. I saw her at an event in December when she said she was happy to have a meeting, but not until after January, because she was busy taking legislation through the House. So wrote to her again to follow up and ask for the follow-up meeting. And in fact, I saw her only a couple of weeks ago when we had the District Council Network Conference, and I had another chat with her, and she admitted basically, as usual, a lot of these things, you know, correspondence gets diverted through the gatekeepers, and she promised that she would make sure it's extracted, and that she promised that she would arrange for a meeting for us to get together and have a discussion about it. I'm waiting for her to come back with that discussion. I'm very grateful to the team for the good practice guide, which is absolutely excellent. And in fact, I have forwarded that on, and I've already engaged with the LGA and the District Council's network on the issue, and forwarded the good practice guide to them, which they were very impressed by. And basically I got the message back that this is far more advanced than any other council in the country. So I think we can probably claim to be spearheading this issue, and I intend to keep doing so because it's something that we need to keep a grip on. I think Leanne did intimate that the companies seem to have rowed back from these potential spurious charges, and I think they understand the issues. It's important that we do keep up the pressure, but also I've made the point to Sharon Taylor and to others, because it's easy for them often to conflate issues regarding leasehold and freehold. For me, and I've told them, this isn't about leasehold premises in tower blocks or any other form of blocks. This is about freehold on ordinary housing estates with individual detached houses, etc. So it's very much concentrating on the freehold bit, and I'm letting the legislation, because that's already going through Parliament, as regarding leasehold. So this is about keeping the pressure on for freehold. I think that's basically where we are at the moment.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving up your evening to come along. I'll try and keep questions for you as brief as possible, because I know you've got another meeting to be away, but we've also got Councillor Upton here as a portfolio holder. So again, thank you for giving up your evening to coming to speak to us. I know you were present at that same round table. Just before I open up for questions, is there anything that you want to say or add to the conversation that might assist?
Well, thank you, and thanks for the invitation. Very pleased to be here. As was said, I will be chairing the LDF meeting next month, so quite soon. So it's a useful forum to come to and participate this evening, pending my chair of the LDF forum on the same subject next month. So I think, without repeating what the leader said, I'll stop there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open it for questions. If anyone has any questions, particularly for Councillors Upton or Clark, if you raise your hand with those first, and then we can release the councillors. Yes.
Got a question for Councillor Clark. Thank you. Thank you for coming here today, and thank you for giving us an update about the roundtable meeting that you had with residents and developers. My question is, are you planning to have another roundtable meeting with the developers, management companies and residents again? Because the good practice guide is fab, is really good. The worry that I have is the adoption of the good practice guide by the developers and management companies, and whether they completely commit to it, because I've read in the report that it's not mandatory, and that is my biggest worry. So how I'm looking to you, is how are you going to ensure that all of them sign up to this?
Well, I think it's an evolving situation. I'm not going to say for absolute definite a time when another roundtable discussion takes place, but if it becomes useful and helpful, then that's something that we can do. Absolutely want to encourage them to sign up, and to be fair to them, they have given the right noises that they are prepared to enter into this and to follow the good practice guide. I think the industry is starting to realise that there is an issue, and that they need to self-regulate, because one of the things that I will be pressing Baroness Taylor on is to ensure that some regulation is drawn up. They're drawing up regulation regarding leasehold, so why not draw up regulation regarding freehold as well? So whilst we are, and I'm appreciative of the management companies and the developers engaging with this, I want to encourage them to keep engaging with it. And if we can come to amicable, voluntary arrangements to self-regulate, always better to have a carrot. Let's use sticks a bit later on.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Councillor Grocott next. Just before I do, just to clarify, either at that roundtable meeting or in the discussions, have all the developers or all the management companies that we are aware of within Rushcliffe agreed in principle to this? Sorry.
No, at this time we've only engaged with the people who attended the meeting. So the next step is, after it's gone through this scrutiny process, is to then engage with the other management companies across the borough. So in terms of that sort of embedding it, it'll be getting in touch with the wider scope of developers that we've got across the borough and the management companies, and sharing this with them and having those meetings to launch it.
Thank you. Councillor Grocott.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, really good, really positive work. I think credit to Councillor Clark for his leadership on this. It's good that Rushcliffe is pushing ahead, and it's good that we are all on the same page and wanting further regulation of this sector. I think it's absolutely positive, and it's great that we can collaborate on it. I was at the round table, and again, it was very positive discussion, a lot of agreement about the intent of what we're trying to do. And I spoke, my question is relating particularly probably to the SPD side of things, Helen. We've talked about, and I know, and I understand the non-mandatory nature of this. I understand that we're encouraging as best we can. I also know that through the planning process, because I didn't used to do this myself around employment and training for a near council nearby here, where we didn't actually have policy powers to influence it, but we've used it in the development application stage and the negotiation stage to talk about it. And developers, because they know there are other things that they want to please you on, sort of say, yeah, we'll be happy to do this. It's not major. It's good. Well, we can sign up to this. We don't have to. We know we don't have to. But if we sign up to this on this, it's inferred that you're building a good relationship, and it helps with other matters where there is a statutory power for the council to regulate it. Notwithstanding that, is there any way we could put into the SPD, and we talked about it before, the council's preferences for how it wants and what it wants the management companies to be? So, for example, we're talking about open spaces. We've talked about the role of, and I wouldn't use this term, but it's kind of like an approved supplier list. So we give lists in the SPD that we keep updated of companies that have signed up to the Good Practice Guide, for example. And so we're showing new developers that may have other management company relationships, because we recognise it's a non-regulated market, that actually these are the management companies that we like, that have signed up to the Rushcliffe Good Practice Guide. We could also include information about our preferences for, again, there may be pitfalls here, because I'm willing to be challenged on it, but first refusal to town and parish councils where they want to perhaps adopt an open space, for example. So that's our preference. And then resident-led entities after that as well, before we get to our named favourite private management companies. So I just wondered if there was the scope to get into that level of specificity, perhaps through the SPD, when we're looking at future developments. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I think in terms of the SPD, it's a policy document that's static. It can't be updated. So the process for an SPD is to create a draft. We've obviously got our internal processes, and then we have to go out for consultation. And then if everything goes well and we're happy with it, and it goes through Cabinet, full council, wherever it needs to go, it then becomes adopted, and it's a document that is there and stays there until we review it. And it's not, we have to go through the whole process to review that. So what I would say is, I wouldn't recommend putting a list of suppliers or kind of something that could change. But what we could do is, Leanne referred to it in the presentation, that we'd put this document on our website. And what we're hoping to do through the SPD is refer to that website. And on that website, we would have a list of developers who signed up to it. We could develop in terms of what the expectations are. And that is something that we can adapt rather than an SPD. So we're looking to make sure that there's a link in the SPD to expectations, but I would err caution as to be too specific in an SPD. But I think another thing that we can do through the planning process is exactly what you said, encouragement. So when we get applications in, we know there's going to be open space. We introduce the open space good practice guide. We say, you know, this is our expectations. You know, Rushcliffe Borough Council have spent a lot of time on this. This is what we want. Whilst we can't put it as a condition or in section 106, we can put a note to applicant. Now, enforceability of that, it isn't there, but it just shows that this is you know, this is what Rushcliffe want and this is what we're putting out there. And it makes developers aware of what we expect and the expectations of the council. So I would say that that's quite a strong message to put on a, you know, planning decision as a legal document, and that we're putting our stamp on there to say this is something that we'd expect from you. In terms of first refusal to town and parish councils, there is going to be an element in the SPD about that. In terms of first refusals, it's a tricky one because it depends. We could look at wording of this section 106s, but that's more specific to individual applications. There's a conversation that we can have with the parish to see if it's something that they're willing to take on, and definitely speak to the developers about that. But I would recommend that that's more of an application specific, but we will make reference to that kind of option in the SPD. And then resident-led entities, again, it's something that can happen, but it may not be something that would work for whatever reason. So I think we've got the SPD, and that establishes the, you know, expectations of this. But then we've got the good practice guide and the website that we can mould a little bit more and update. So that would be my recommendation in planning terms, if that helps. Thank you.
Councillor Grocott, does that satisfy your
Yeah, the devil's obviously in the detail. Look forward to seeing more of it as develops. But yeah, I forgot to say as well, credit to you guys as well for the work that you've done in bringing this forward. Really good. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Chewings.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. A few questions. The first question, though, is, so we're in a situation we are at the moment because the properties that were being developed and the open spaces were then going into management companies rather than previously into the borough. Is there a recognition from yourself, Councillor Clark, that this was a decision made by the borough to pass on this burden onto new owners, and it was a political decision made back in 2011 to remove the financial burden from the Rushcliffe Borough Council?
Councillor
I said 15 years, so that's 14 years ago. Yeah, the reason that what started or kicked it off was the Gamston development, where there were acres and acres of grass cutting, which was costing, from memory, I think somewhere around about £300,000 a year to cut the grass, which was a significant financial burden. And if you then multiply that out with the number of developments that have taken place since, I don't know how many big developments there are, but let's say it's 10 times the amount, then now you'd be looking at sort of £3, £4, £5 million just to cut grass around the borough, which would be a massive burden on the taxpayer, and that the council tax would be under severe challenge. So that's why the decision was taken that far better that the people who benefit from those open areas adjacent to their houses, then if a management company was formed, then a management company would be able to do it probably more efficiently than the council. So it was a question of mitigating the financial burdens.
Yes, Helen. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I just thought it would be useful to point out that this isn't just a Rushcliffe Borough Council issue. It's a national issue. And my experience in other authorities is, even if the council doesn't make the decision that was made here at Rushcliffe, it's not something that we have full control of. So, for example, where I've worked previously, the developers can just say, look, we're not willing to do a commuted zone, we don't want you to take it on, we're going to keep it ourselves. And I just point to the report where we worked out if at Fareham we had have required in a commuted sum, it would have been £11 million for a 15-year commuted sum. It's a significant amount of money, which also plays into a viability argument for the scheme, which affects other things. So just to give a bit of a context from my experience, even if a council doesn't make the decision not to take on land, that doesn't necessarily mean that the developer won't make that decision for them, if that helps.
Thank you. That helps me in my understanding, Helen. Thank you very much. Councillor Clark, I know you wanted to come back.
Yeah, just to add to, as a result of what Helen was saying, it's all very well having a commuted sum for however many years it is, 15 years or whatever, but then there's a massive cliff edge then. In the 16th year, who pays? So there's be a massive monetary time bomb.
Thank you. Councillor Chewings, I'm going to come back to you, then I've got Councillor Edavine and Councillor Way.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. I fully accept that the whole mess needs sorting at national government level with legislation to change things. But I think it's important to recognise that obviously back in 2011, a decision was made to pass that burden on to the owners. Now, there's other options that could have been considered. It could have been an SPD at that point in time in relation to sorting out commuted sum. And that's something that I would have been keen for us to look at. And I think we need to look at also with regards to Stratford-upon-Avon District Council, who's got a SPD in place, which sets out preferences, talks about potential of town councils, even the district council.
Just
and
as
then
a
also,
quick reminder there, Councillor Chewings, I think that was dealt with 2 meetings ago when we dealt with this in terms of the Stratford-upon-Avon issue and additional information that was requested. So I'm just careful that we are. Councillor Clark has got to leave at some point. Just if you've got specific questions for the councillor.
If you allow me to finish, Chair, I'll get to the question. But I think it's quite a pertinent point, and also I think the residents of Rushcliffe will be quite interested in this. And I appreciate we've talked about Stratford-upon-Avon in the past, but this is relevant. This allows for a commuted sum of up to 30 years, and that should have been a consideration. Is it not true, Councillor Clark, that the borough has failed the residents in not undertaking those responsibilities and looking to protect that? And coming back to your point about when the commuted sum ends, who pays for it? Well, I pay council tax. They pay council tax, and there's certain portions there that goes to the town and parish councils where they exist, the borough/district councils, and the county councils. My grass is cut by the council. So surely isn't it right that those that live in those properties pay the council tax and they receive the same services I do, and many of us do around this table, likewise?
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Quite simply, the decision was made to ensure that we were acting in the best interests of the residents, because costs were increasing quite substantially. Just to say, oh well, it comes out of the council tax, that's not viable, because the council tax, guess what, is paid for by the taxpayer. And if we have to then, after whether it's 15 years or 30 years or 50 years, suddenly have to bear that additional cost, then the council tax would have to go up to reflect that additional cost. Who knows what's going to be happening in 15, 30 years, but potentially the cap, if there are still caps, if there's still council tax, maybe things might change, but I certainly haven't got that crystal ball to know. So one's got to work on what is happening now and the system in operation at the moment. If that stays, then there'll be massive extra burden on council tax whenever that cliff edge, deadline, whatever you want to call it, comes.
Thank you. Leanne wanted to come in just on this point before I come to Councillor Edavine.
Thank you, Chair. I think just going back to the previous scrutiny report where we did cover this in depth, and just to reiterate again on that council tax point, and as Helen has just said, we have calculated that the bare minimum maintenance at Fareham would, for 15 years, would be a commuted sum of £11 million. a 1% increase in council tax in 2024. It might be slightly different now, but broadly it's £77,000. So you can just see that the two numbers don't equate. So council tax cannot cover an £11 million bill by raising council tax by a couple of percentage points to cover this. The council tax covers a broad spectrum of services. In addition to that, there's also no legislation, again, to require developers to transfer the land to the council. So Helen's experience in other authorities was the same experience that we were having here in Rushcliffe, which is why we took that decision to do something different. Developers were already saying, we're not going to give you the land. So before we took the decision not to receive the open spaces, developers were already saying, we're going to hang on to this land because we can't afford the community sum. And the picking up on the Stratford upon Avon model, we have spoken to them at length about their SPD, and they are requiring a 30-year commuted sum. So if a developer's not wanting to pay a 15-year commuted sum, they're not going to be wanting to pay a 30-year commuted sum either, because they just the scheme just can't afford it. So once you're trying to take that level of money out of a scheme, the first thing that gets impacted through viability is affordable housing. So that's always what happens with when there's a viability issue. The affordable housing then gets compromised. I think we all recognise that the system is not. It is not where anybody wants it to be. However, the open spaces have become so much more complex than 15 years ago. So 15 years ago, when developers were already starting not to want to have a commuted sum, it was mowing some grass and watering some trees. And now it's suds and parks and huge swathes of open space. It's just a completely different regime than it was 15 years ago. And I think we've got to recognise that when the decision was taken 15 years ago, it's great with hindsight, but we didn't have that hindsight 15 years ago when the decision was taken. And as Helen said, this is a national issue across the whole country, of which we're trying to step in and see whether we can do something different. But really, it's got to come from the national level.
Thank you. And of course, if the planning laws, etc., had been different 20 odd years ago, we'd probably all be on management companies rather than trying to correct that now. But thank you for that clarification. Councillor Edivine.
Forgive me, obviously I'm substituting, so I'm not familiar with everything that's been discussed in the past, but I think there are 2 points. One is obviously, this scrutiny group should be looking forwards, and therefore we should be looking to bring in something that is forward-looking rather than wondering back about what happened in 2011. But I think it's absolutely reasonable that, you shouldn't expect people in my ward in small villages to be paying for lawn mowing in Bingham, for example. And it just wouldn't have, that's not how council tax should be used, in my opinion. And a lot of those small villages, quite often the parish councils will look at whether they want to take the responsibility of mowing areas within the land. It's not on development, so it's slightly different. But I think, I'm just basically saying I fully endorse the fact that as a borough, we shouldn't expect all of our residents to pay for grass mowing across the whole borough.
Thank you. Councillor Way.
Thank you. Just want to pick up on something that Councillor Clark said about why should everybody, and actually Councillor Edivine saying very much the same thing. The people who live in these estates should pay for the facilities or the amenity that they use. I think one of the things I hear most commonly is the fact that they're paying for it, but it's open to everyone. I don't know how you can deal with this, really, but there are areas and get bombarded by these things on a regular basis, and there's particular issues around us. Why are they paying for particular things that are open for everybody to use? I've heard children being told off for being on one of the play parks because those residents pay for it and they don't. This child doesn't live there. There's people who don't want the children to walk down a particular footpath to get to school because they're paying for it. So children who don't live on that estate shouldn't walk on that footpath. This is the sort of nonsense that this has given rise to. And now we have talk of people having gated communities. And I think it's really important that our communities stay holistic. We want a particular village or community to be as one. We don't want to see them broken up and sort of battles between what's yours and mine. And if this guide helps move us forward from that, that's great. But somewhere we've got to find a way to help the people who are already in this awful situation. What was described in the Competitions and Markets Authority report as a subset of communities. And we need to do away with the subsets and get everybody back as one community. And your point about, Councillor Edavine, about why should people in villages pay for the mowing of something somewhere else? That's what we do. Our borough precept goes to pay for things across the borough. And listening to the discussions at recent council meetings actually supports people in other parts of the county as well, I understand. So that isn't really a good argument against paying for somebody else's grass cutting. But also it's not about grass cutting anymore, as we know. Grass cutting is a minor part of this minefield now.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Edavine and Councillor Grocott. I just wanted to remind us what we're actually here to talk about, which is about the Good Practice Guide and the lobbying of Parliament, rather than actually revisiting the original topic of management and etc. That we've already been discussing. I know we're going to get back on because otherwise we're in danger of just keep going around in a never-ending loop. So, Councillor Edavine, and I'll come to you, Councillor Grocott.
I was going to make a comment on that, in as much as if I look, and I understand what Councillor Way is saying, but you know, for example, in the village I live in, we have a community park. It's paid for by the community. We pay for the grass mowing, all of those sorts of things. We don't mind if other people come and use it. In fact, we have lots of people come and use it because they think it's one of the best parks around. So it's a lot more complicated, and I'm very saddened to hear that people on estates and new developments say you can't walk across there because we pay for that footpath,
and that may be because of the escalating charges that some of them are getting.
And I also understand that there's a element of unfairness in some of these management company charges as well. And so I wasn't trying to score points. I was trying to sort of basically say, you know, if we're putting these things in place, then surely that's the way we should be moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Grocott. I've got Councillor Upton, then I'll come to Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, I think this is just to go back to my previous point. This is why I think the first refusal option for parish councils and town councils is important. I mean, I'll accept that we're not going to go over all the old ground again. I do agree with Councillor Chewins' points, but I get we are where we are now, and we aren't going to go back to a full borough adoption of everything. And we live in an environment where lots of multiple tiers of government manage different open spaces, so I'm completely comfortable with that. In my village, it's managed by a charitable trust, which is made up of 2 parish councils. That's what our main playing field is managed by, and that's a good option. And we too don't mind when people come from outside of the villages and use it. But I think Councillor Way's point is when you have estates, adjunct estates, that aren't really a recognised community of interest. They're not really a separate place. So for people, so that's when you will get that challenge, because I'll give you a perfect example. There's an issue on this as well. There's one in Aslacton Park. There's a tiny, small open space. If the option of developing that open space, even deciding what to do with the open space in the planning process, had been to work with the parish council on it, it probably wouldn't have been built, and we would have got a better investment in the main open space of the village, because it's about useful for every child from the age of about 18 months to 3, and then they get bored on it because it's basically got some very basic play equipment in there. Those people will also still get annoyed when other people use them. So I think where you've got an option where an estate isn't like Fareham, like a new town, where it's not of that scale. You know, when you're talking about a medium-sized estate, 50 to 100 houses to 200 houses or whatever, where it's an adjunct, it's in those situations that it really does need to be part of that fabric of that community and accessible to everyone, and where parish and town councils, if not the borough, need to be given that option to adopt those open spaces. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Greycock. I know Helen has already got that point from you, but thank you.
Add one thing? Just on the point of play parks, that is something we've included in the new play strategy, so that there's a wider opportunity to link in with existing facilities. Because I think you made that point at the roundtable meeting, so we have fed that back through into the play park strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. I know you wanted to comment.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just briefly to highlight paragraph 4.2 of the report, which says, in response to the CMA's report of February 24, the government stated their intention to look into this, gather evidence and all the rest of it. I just put the question mark, but what and when? And I think that's quite crucial. I know the government's got a lot on at the moment, but they've stated their intention to look at this, but I have no time frame for that. And perhaps if in your deliberations with the contact, Councillor Clark, you could sort of push that one forward as to some form of timescale, would be very useful.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Perek, then Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about the good practice guide. In the guide, it says that the developers and the management company would be expected to give like a breakdown of costs, and that seems to be a big issue at the minute, which I'm facing in Edwalton. Somebody got in touch with me a while ago saying person wanted to remortgage his house, and the lender wanted to charge him £800 for a deed of variation because of the management company that was involved in it, and it shouldn't be that much. So in the deed of in the good practice guide, it mentions transparency. So Councillor Greycock earlier suggested about having a separate document with which developers or management companies are signing up to the good practice guide. Similarly, can we have a separate document outlining the fees for different management companies, and could that document be available to all councillors as well and the council officers? That's something I want to check.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether us dictating fees is anything that we can do, but I was going to ask a question for Helen as well about the landscaping management schemes, you know, dictating what they should replace things with. But is there anything in that when we're putting into place about how they can up the fees, or is there anything to do with fees in that, or is that completely off the agenda?
Yeah, so the difficulty is how far you can go with planning. So once you start getting into fees, it's more of a running of a business rather than the planning process. So in terms of the management plans, it's about what plants go where, how many, where that area is, how it's going to be maintained from a point of keeping those plants alive and kind of the trees, etc. And you know how it will be maintained, but it doesn't go to the kind of macro detail of how many times the lawn's going to be mowed, how many times they're going to pick weeds out of beds or anything like that. That goes a little bit too far. Then in terms of prices, that gets into the business, so that there's nothing in planning legislation that kind of says that how to control management companies. It's more about the built environment, soft and hard. So the focus in the section 106 and on planning is making sure that's there and enforceable. So we could send an enforcement officer out and he could count the trees and say, actually, you know, there's 4 trees here and there's meant to be 6. We need to do something about that. Very difficult to send an enforcement officer out and say you're charging £700 when you should be charging 200. there isn't any legislation in planning to kind of deal with that. So I would say, unfortunately, that's not something that we could control as a council.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that as a council, we can't control that, but for the sake of transparency, could we not have the management company just give us the list of fees, what they charge? We're not telling them that you need to charge this much, but what I'm struggling at the minute is what are they charging for different things, and residents then having to kind of go back to their contracts and ask them again and again, and there's no clear cut answer whether they have increased or decreased. So if they already have a set of fees, all we want is for them to be transparent and give that to the council. So if, say, in the future somebody has to say sell their house, if that list is already there, then they could refer to that list and say, well, this is what is the list, this is the fees. And then, for example, if they've quoted 700, then the resident, they can go and challenge them. Well, the list that you gave us was 700, you're now charging us 1500. So not asking the council to get involved, but just for us to get that document from the management company.
I'm not sure that we can probably stray into that because we're then probably acting as an intermediary, and that's contractual between them when they buy the house and they should have that all in place anyway. So I'm not sure that's something we can get involved in. Leanne, I'm just going to want you to answer that, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Solomon, and then I'm going to move to the recommendations. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and what you're asking for is something that's with the management company that's already in place, and the guide is trying to hold these transparency standards going forward. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. However, as part of it's first port, isn't it? That's at Ed Walton. So as part of launching this, we can have those conversations as well with with management companies regarding their transparency, because if they're signing up to this going forward, why can't they do this with their existing schemes as well? So we can have that conversation with them. Just coming back, if I could, Chair, on the CMA issue that the Councillor Upton raised, just had an email pop through literally 5 minutes ago, and it refers to there is a Greenbelt group which is part of the working through the MHCLG, which is active and live, and it's been set up, and it's set up with a small team of people to respond to the CMA report. So I understand, I've just been told from somebody who is working on that, a solicitor, that there's that group that's been set up. So
thank you. Councillor Solomon, you've been waiting very patiently. Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to pick up on a specific type of situation with all this with management company, and the outcome is a suggestion to put into the guide. So lots of management companies park them there, housing developers who choose not to create a management company and hang on to that land. So I've experience of that where I live for the last 25 years. First of all, do we know what percentage of developments where that happens now? Is it still a decent proportion, or is it a minor occurrence? And then I've got a follow on.
Just stop quickly. I think that's historic legacy, because now developers are transferring them to management companies.
That's what I kind of guessed, because mine is historic. It's a 25-year-old development, but I still think we can put a recommendation in to the guide, because I think those situations, 25 years or so on, developers may reach a point where they want to just hand that over. So Upper Saxondale, the situation is that the housing developer paid for the upkeep of that. We didn't have any management company or service charge or anything for that at all, and they chose to hang on to that land because I think back then the amount of money that they would have had to contribute was significant. But 25 years later on, it's a hell of a lot more significant now, but they've bitten the bullet. And because we've had a parish council set up, that land has now, from the developer, been directly transferred into our parish council, along with that significant amount of money. I think the parish council is the best organisation to manage that, because they're going to manage that money effectively. They've then got the new precepts to maintain it, but also they live there, they're invested in the area, and the plans that our parish council now have to manage the land as it should have been managed for the last 25 years and increase the biodiversity and the interest with coppicing and all sorts of, you know, moth surveys and everything. It's just wonderful. So could we put in the guide a recommendation for that historic situation that housing developers, if they do want to pass on the land, they look to going to the parish council in the first instance there, rather than then deciding, oh, let's make a management company, because that's not the outcome we want. I think there's no harm in putting it in the open spaces guide. No, well, as Helen said, we're putting it in the SPD, so it follows through. That was one of the examples of where developers stopped wanting to pay community sums, because that was a Section 106 planning obligation. And like you say, I remember many negotiations with them to try and take that land with community sum over a long period of time. So yes, I think we can look to see about including that option.
Thank you. Councillor Chewings, have you got some more questions on the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Leanne mentioned a short while ago that obviously we've engaged with developers and companies, and they're prepared to sign up to this document. So my question is, this document's come about because the way residents have been treated, how they feel, and pressure's been put on to councillors. Council Way's been a massive advocate on this issue, as many other councillors have. So what have we done with regards to this document to engage and consult those that are affected by it? So have we gone out and spoke to the focus groups, the community groups that are affected by this matter, and see if they are happy with the proposed document?
We've only circulated this guide to the people that were at the round table meeting, which included 2 representatives from residents' groups.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, carry on, please.
You please, and I'm nearly there. So I mean, obviously we refer to the document itself, and obviously it's accepted that it's a voluntary document that people can sign up to, and they can choose to do so or not to do so. And obviously, as a council, we could highlight those that have signed up to it and those that haven't done it. But then when you look at the language, and don't get me wrong, I'm pleased we've got this document. I'm pleased we're moving forward, but some of the language in there for me is very weak. I'd like to see some changes. So I'll give some examples. So any complaints are acknowledged and handled in line with the responsible organisation complaints policy. Well, what's that minimum standard? It could be a very bland and very basic policy. So should we not set out what that minimum standard should be, or recommendations? We then look at residents will receive appropriate notice of any increase in billing. Well, what is appropriate notice? Is that 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 days? Shouldn't we set a minimum standard in there? These organisations, yes, they don't have to follow it. They have a choice of whether they sign up to it or not. But then we can say, this is what we expect as a borough. A management company that actually is good should be doing this, this, and this. They choose them with the sign up, and then we can publish who has and who hasn't signed up for it. But for me, some of the language in there is some strong language, don't get me wrong, but there's some of the language there is very, very weak, where people just say, well, I've given appropriate notice. My appropriate notice is different to your appropriate notice. And then increase in billings will be explained or itemised at the point of notice of the increases. Well, what notice should we give in? And for me, there could be more detail in there. And then these organisations then have that choice as to whether they sign up or not. And then we can highlight whether they have or not. And that's that accountability. But at the moment, some of the language for me is a bit weak.
Thank you. I think those comments have been noted. I know Councillor Solomon wants to comment on this point as well.
I understand the
desire to put in metrics to quantify whether someone meets a standard or not. And it does help with clarity. But in this instance, this is a guideline and no one's got any teeth to enforce any of this anyway. So it's all built on goodwill. So you can put all the metrics in you like, but what's going to be the outcome? No one's going to enforce anything. So, yeah, so you're just adding an extra burden, but there isn't anyone in place that can police it and do anything about it.
I'm just going to come to Clark because he wants to respond as well, because I know he's the person that's actually been conversing with government. So, Councillor Clark.
Well, just to partly respond, and Councillor Solomon sort of partly touched on it. The main ambition of this document is as a voluntary document to encourage people, because the main essence, as far as I'm concerned, and we've always been very good in Rushcliffe at this, and long may it continue, in terms of creating communities. And to me, a thriving community, and community where people talk to each other and engage with each other, is the most important aspect, which is why, just to answer Councillor Way's comments, I wouldn't like to see sort of gated areas, because that becomes a them and us, and not a sense of community. But I just wanted to also address and I understand what Councillor Turin's getting at, but you then have to think, well, what are the final consequences? The word reasonable is chosen very carefully, because it's a legal word, would you believe? Because ultimately, if somebody has a dispute on the fees or the notices, I'm sure that different companies will choose different timescales. And if it went to a court of law, then the judge would be deciding what is reasonable.
Of course, it's not for us to necessarily adjudicate.
We can't anticipate what is reasonable. Therefore, it has to be that word in order that hopefully people can come to an agreement voluntarily, which is what I sincerely hope, rather than the carrot and stick approach, which I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. Councillor Grocott wants to come in, and I'll come to you, Keir.
Yeah, I think that we don't need to get overly bogged down. I get the whole thing that it's totally mandatory and everything like that. And I'm just drawing on my own experience again. We use the language reasonable endeavours, best endeavours. It wasn't enforceable when we were doing employment and training policy at Nottingham. And we set targets. We said 17 apprenticeships. We didn't say some apprenticeships. We said we've had a formula which we calculated the amount of apprenticeships that could be delivered reasonably, as we thought it, as labour market experts, so-called, that the developers and their main contractors and subcontractors could work towards. And we agreed that number with them in the planning process. So is the answer, going back to what Helen said before, that the guide might not be able to have a minimum standard because of diversity and variety, but the SPD stipulates you'll agree something along those lines, which does put a metric in. And again, the main point is, I don't disagree. I don't think that an unenforceable metric is of no value. It's still got some value. And if developers sign up to it and agree to it, and they go, oh, there's a metric on there. Yeah, okay, I'll use reasonable endeavours to notify within less than 2 weeks, you know. And if I don't do that, if I try to do that, but I don't do it, I've used reasonable endeavours to do it, right? So you can still have a metric with reasonable endeavours.
Helen, yes, please.
Thank you. I think the difficulty that we have in this document is it's there to support our communities and our residents. If we put things in there that aren't realistic, that we can't enforce, it sets expectations, and I think we need to manage resident expectations. Again, going back to planning and Section 106s, there is a requirement in the legislation that to put something into a Section 106 or a condition, it has to be precise, it has to be enforceable, it has to meet the tests, and a developer is not going to sign up to that. And if we were challenged trying to get some timescales in there, I would struggle to formulate an argument to put it in there, because again, we're airing into how a business is run rather than the planning. So fully appreciate what you're saying, and I think, you know, we all would like to have a little bit more clarity for our residents, but we can't go there. And my concern is that if we try and go there too far in this document, it undermines the document as a whole, because there's an expectation that doesn't happen. And, you know, residents come to us and say, look, you said you wanted this and it's not happening. And we say, yeah, we know, we can't do anything about it. So it's that balance, I would say.
Thank you. I know you've heard the rationale for why. I don't want this argument to get bogged down into a we want this, we want that type argument. We're here to look at whether a best practice guide is holistically the right way to go, etc. So, Keir, did you want to come back on, or did you have any further questions? And I'm going to move on to Councillor Wade.
Just one very quick point, Phil. Look, no one is saying this is a document to hold something to account to say you have to do this. It's about expectations. We're here today, and we've been having these debates for some time in many meetings about expectations not being met. Now, what the risk is, we've got Rushcliffe Borough Council's Management of Open Spaces Good Practice Guide. Okay. Now we're going to get developers that's going to sign up to this, and I've got no doubt they will put on their websites, we've signed up to Rushcliffe Management of Open Spaces Good Practice Guide. We're abiding by this. And then all of a sudden, somebody comes along, they've not, for example, been given an increase of billing in an appropriate notice period. They determined it is, but then they'll go, well, this is in line with what Rushcliffe is. So I think it's only fair that we said, look, we believe it should be a minimum of X number of weeks notice. They've got the choice of whether they sign up to this good practice guide or not. We're not enforcing it. We're not the adjudicators moving forward. It is what we believe to be the minimum standards set out. We're not asking for enforcement. It's a guide. And those developers have got the choice whether they sign up to it or not. And do you know what we can do? Okay, we can't enforce it, but if they don't meet what we believe is to be a minimum notice, for example, or we can say, in that case, you're not endorsing that, so we're going to remove that you are actually endorsing this guide. And then it highlights those developers that are not being good providers, and that accountability, that public accountability, is a way forward. I'm not asking, because the authority cannot administer these deadlines, but we can say, okay, you're not abiding by what our good practice guide is. Of course we can.
Thank you. And officers have answered why they think they can't do that. I don't want it to get bogged down in a I want this, we can't do it type argument. So I'm going to move on from that. Councillor Way, have you got a further question, please?
Yes, it's a question about one of the things in the guide under transparency. It's page 20 in our documents. The last bullet point. Somebody's, because obviously this is out on the website and people I know have been looking at it, and somebody's queried this statement about the tenure and management of the new home. Can you tell me what your thinking was behind putting that wording in, the management of the new home? On the transparency page, it's the last, page 20 in the documents. Yeah, the bottom point, and it says indication of costs are likely to be directly associated with the tenure and management of the new home. And it's the wording management of the new home that was causing some concern.
Yes, so that wording is relating specifically to prospective buyers of the home, so they can have a better understanding of the costs that are going to be associated through the management company going forward if they were to purchase the home. That's not necessarily a line built in for existing homeowners.
So that's specific to a particular home for every homeowner.
So this is going to the issue of people not being necessarily fully aware or aware at all of the costs they're going to incur through management companies through buying that house.
I think it's the wording management of the new home. It makes it sound like they're going to actually manage that home. And just looking to see if there's a way we can soften that wording a bit to take away that. And just one other quick thing, Leanne, you were saying that I think you're alluding to the fact that this obviously isn't retrospective, But maybe if we get into some dialogue with some of the management companies, we might be able to persuade them to look on their existing residents with a way of looking at perhaps reducing some of the burden that they put on them in terms of the fees. And somebody talked about fees. I actually have got a list of fees here from a particular management company on this estate, it says. So I suspect they vary them wherever they are. Okay.
Yes, I think we can. That's the hope, isn't it? If you get a company signing up to this document going forward, why can they not look backwards to see what they've got in existing? And I know that some developers have done that already, where they've felt that something has had unintended consequences. They've gone back and changed things. So yes, I think that's a good point.
So thank you. I'm going to now just move to the recommendations from the report. But just before I did, as a point of clarity, just a point of clarity, it's been pointed out there's a slight error just in it on the 6.2, the legal implications. Looks like there's a cut and paste there. It says there are no financial implications. I think that should read there are no legal implications on that section.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that for the minutes. So there's two recommendations on this. It's recommended the Growth and Scrutiny Group endorses the Good Practice Guide for the management of open spaces and forwards it to Cabinet for consideration. Is everyone content with that? I know with the observations that have, I know the officers have taken up a number of the comments and a few suggestions for wording changes and alterations where practicable. Is everyone content for it to go forward? Keir, you're not?
Yeah, I was going to say I would like to see some amendments where we could say where reasonable metrics could be considered in the document, because this is a great issue across the borough, and fantastic guide there, but we need some more clarity, we need some more details. So I would like that to be added as a recommendation.
In terms of the changes that members of the group have requested, can I just ask the officers for their view of how long, or whether you think that they are achievable, or whether how long it would take to reword, to circulate for the group to then endorse?
I think to make some of the changes that have been suggested not particularly long, a week or two. I think the issue with the metrics is going to be a bit more difficult, because we're trying to arrive at a balanced position where we're encouraging management companies and developers to sign up to this and to manage expectations of residents, and we want to raise the standards and have as many developers and management companies signing up to it as possible. And when it turns into a document that is a guide of principles to something that is metrics based, it becomes then harder to get that sign up. So we just need to consider that. I take your points on board, but we just need to consider that in the round.
And also, this has been going on for some considerable time now, and we want to try and move it forward. And Councillor Solomon, did you have a suggestion there?
My question relates directly to the time period linked to this. So if we voted to bring this in, how long would it stand for before it was requiring revision? Because I think that's a pertinent point. It's put something in is better than nothing in, and it's about then seeing what the impact of that is and whether additional whether the introduction of metrics will be seen as valid. So the review of it and reflection. Yeah.
We haven't considered at this point the review period. But what we've been doing more recently is having it almost as a live document, so that the idea would be to have endorsement by cabinet to adopt it, and then iterations can go forward in a timely fashion without it having to necessarily go back. So a delegation to director to make those changes going forward, so that it can stay relevant.
Thank you, Chair. So it can be an ongoing bit of work to introduce metrics in various bits when appropriate.
Yeah, I don't see this being the end. It's just the beginning. So,
Councillor
yeah.
Mason.
Okay, basically, I am fairly happy with this. That's not to say that it's completely right, but I think it's been very difficult for officers to come up with something that makes sense to everybody that reads it, including communities and things, and not be too prescriptive, which we can't be, because it's not a legal document that we're looking at. It's a guide. It's a guide. It's not something that that has to be adhered to completely, because we are trying to persuade them to do the right thing. And it might be that it takes a while for them to realise that they are better off doing things and having some sort of input into it than not. And until our government comes up with something better to do, and I notice in the letter that the leader sent, that a lot of the points that have been raised here today are actually in that letter asking her. So we should be leading this whole method of trying to get people to do something. You know, this is only a first step, and it would be nice to think that, yes, if the government come out and want to do something about it, that would be good. But I think we have to do something and not get too complicated on it, and just give broad outlines to what we want and what we would expect. It would have far more effect than starting to go into too much detail and we want this, and a long list. Those are my views.
Thank you very much. I just want to go back a step if I can. The recommendation is that we endorse it to recommend it to Cabinet. The decision doesn't necessarily sit with us as a committee. Our job is to scrutinise this, which we have done. I agree with the sentiments that are being expressed about it would be great if we could put these things in. But this is a really emotive subject that we have debated as a committee for an awful long time. We've got to the point we've got to, and we've made some real progress. And I'm really keen that we actually continue to try that, to make that progress. And it would be a real shame if we couldn't endorse a recommendation to put that forward to Cabinet, with the comments that have been made by the committee about looking towards maybe, I mean, some of the comments are really easy, they're minor alterations in wording and things. But with the metrics, particularly with a view to Cabinet actually considering, and the officers considering, whether that is even a possibility moving forward. I'm just keen that we try and move this forward rather than keep sending it back and round in circles. Councillor Grocott, I'm going to let.
So, okay, so what I
just put your microphone on. Sorry, so sorry, people at home.
What I'd suggest then, and what I would need to support it, is if we add in a C, which is about exploring through the deployment of the Good Practice Guide and further consultation with management companies and residents groups and parish councils, the idea of adding in some specifics at a point in future that is brought to this group. So I don't want to stop the adoption of this guide, because something is better than nothing. I agree entirely, and we want to be, the forerunners in this space, as Councillor Clark said right at the start. So
I think that's a very sensible
so
suggestion.
if we can add it in a C that says we'll continue to investigate how the Good Practice Guide can be augmented and improved, specifically with some specifics. Well, you'll find the wording. specifically, no. You'll find the word where we could actually, because there will be standard numbers that we're just not aware of because we haven't done a massive consultation of loads of management companies, you know. So
I know lots of people want to.
Sorry, so that's my point
anyway.
anyway.
But thank you. That's a very sensible suggestion. We're happy to do that, and I think that the wording you've used has been captured. We'll tinker with it. Councillor Perec.
Very quick, I second that, and just with an addition of that, a second roundtable meeting takes place with our leader chairing that, and residents group, developers all getting involved with this new SPD
I
after
think
the
we can
cabinet
probably
adopted it.
incorporate that in that C in terms of we'll continue to look at develop and include continuing consultation moving forward.
Yeah,
I think that's eminently that's an
the appropriate time. Yeah.
Okay, with that in mind, is everybody content now that we accept those recommendations along with the amended further part from Councillor Greycock? Yeah, we'll show of hands, please. Thank you. That is carried. And obviously the third part of that was that Councillor Clark continues to lobby community, which is B. Yes, but not tonight. Councillor Clark and Councillor Upton, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate we've kept you. You've stayed later than you said you were able to. Thank you very much. There is just one item left on the agenda for us, which is the work programme. At the moment, there is nothing on that work programme, so I'll just plead with members. If you have any items or your colleagues have any items that could be considered for scrutiny, please submit them and we will try and add them into the work programme moving forwards. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it's been an emotive topic and we've visited it on a number of occasions already, but I think that is a real progress, and I would just like to express my thanks to the officers for the amount of time and effort they've spent trying to get to the point we are today. And I think we are leading the way as a borough. So thank you very much from us as a committee for all the work you've done on this. I think the residents will be pleased that we're leading the way on it. So with that said, thank you very much, and I'll call the meeting to a close. Thank you very much.